Okay, then officially welcome everybody to another Technical Steering Committee meeting. Today we are discussing GEP number 68, the Gateway API extension for Gardner Schutz, presented by Sebastian. And yeah, I think there were already a lot of comments in the PR. Maybe some of them are also already open, so probably we should, as usual, directly dive into the questions. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and raise your points.
I rather have points for discussion, no strict questions. If nobody has any clarifying questions,
Just
I
go
can
on.
start. Okay, one of my points in the PR comments was that I wouldn't put migration tooling related to extensions or Kubernetes objects and so on in Garden CTL. What's the feeling of this round? Do you
Agreed.
agree?
I think it's basically, I assume, I think Sebastian can share his thoughts, but I assume it was just taken as it's already there. But I agree, we can just take a different binary um, that we can ship separately, and that makes more sense. I think all the other uh, providers also do something like that. So there are different binaries and executables already available to do these kinds of migrations. So that doesn't have to go into Garden CTL from my point of view.
If it goes in the current STL, then this opens the path for other extensions to request support for similar behavior so that they want to extend it. Not that I have some examples in mind right now, but if we do it for one extension, then this is a precedent and yeah, it will have to support it. And I'm not aware Garden STL to have a extensibility concept right now. So everything is in tree. And eventually this could be problematic in long term. So
Yeah.
maybe in this light, it's indeed better to have it in a separate binary.
Yeah, looking at it from the other perspective, I think it's also easier to just ship another binary from the extension repository, for example, because it just aligns with the development lifecycle of the extension, which is probably what the maintainers work on. Otherwise, you would need to align with the development lifecycle of Garden CTL, release lifecycle, and so on, which might be more difficult.
Yeah, I would also prefer to not have it in GuardCTL because the tool is actually meant for yeah more operators to interact with the clusters and not for yeah a place for putting migration code. Sounds weird to be honest. So a separate binary that is shipped from the extension, or as you proposed, some script or whatever would probably be better.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian says he has some connection problems with Sue.
Mm.
Yeah, I hope it's now better. I left the VPN.
We can hear and see you.
Okay, that's good
Do
to
you
know.
have any comment on the Garden CTL topic?
Uh, no, I agree with you that we could shift.
Okay, cool. Then we could move on to the next point. I like that you added an example of the provider config API so that we can discuss the API design. One thing that surprised me was to see a spec section in the provider config. If I remember correctly, we don't have a spec section in any of the other provider config APIs. because, well, there's also no status section in there, right? It's just a version subsection of the shoot API that is not known to Gardener itself. So I suggest omitting the spec section.
Yeah, we can get rid of that.
Okay. Then another point regarding the API design was about experimental features. So I think it's good to allow users to opt into such things. I was just wondering about the naming of this particular field. If I'm familiar with Gateway API, I would probably expect something like this channel selection, right? So it might not be perfectly clear that experimental features is related to like selecting the stable versus experimental channel. It might also be that the implementation in Envoy Gateway has some experimental features, right? So in that case, I propose differentiating a bit. Maybe you can keep experimental features as a section, but like have a field in there called channel that defaults to stable, but can be set to experimental. Something like this might be clearer to users or more intuitive. Let's put it that way.
I mean, I would have preferred the other one, what I've written. And also, I think at the end we document that in the extension. So it's also in the documentation. So channel sounds a little bit for me more like some networking stuff. But if the others agree with you, I can change. So.
I don't have a particularly strong opinion. I'm also not too familiar with the Gateway API and so on, but this was just something that caught my eye and I wanted to open the discussion.
I mean, release a channel is generally a well-established word, right, for such things. So, for example, GKE also has these channels. I think are called release channels or something. I don't know. But it's not something that is obviously related to networking only. So especially for enabling
beta features and alpha features.
Yeah. So if this is the only reason.
If there's a strong opinion, I can change. So I'm fine with that. But
Gateway API point of view, all features that are in the experimental channel, sooner or later, they should graduate and go to the stable one. So this is one thing that could happen in the future. And what Tim also shared, the implementation itself, in this case, Envoy, they have some their own specifics and additional resources, controllers, features, and so on, as it is described in the enhancement proposal. So maybe it is indeed nice to have some way to distinguish between the common gateway API experimental features and Envoy internals. How are they controlled? One example is this service mesh that is available. The gateway API itself has graduated this couple of releases ago to the stable channel, but as far as I understand, the extension itself does not want to configure it and provide support for the service mesh, even though it is in the stable channel. So maybe this should find its way in the spec.
so you are saying you also would like to have the service mesh support in that extension, or?
If the extension claims it supports the gateway API and tries to run some conformance tests, it should eventually support the service mesh, I would say, because it's part of the API. Otherwise, it will not be fully compatible, and this should be documented at least. Eventually, the service mesh in the future can be enabled, and then it can be configurable via the extension spec, so that users that do not want the service mesh, they will not get it. but those that want it, they should be able to enable it. But the focus right now is just the ingress networking to expose services. This is the focus, and anything else could come later. But from design point of view, it should be already in mind that such involvement could happen in the future to have the service mesh and so on.
I mean, when I checked which specific implementation of the gateway API we wanted to use, we only looked for the ingress part, but for the service mesh part, right, there are also other solutions. So we only focused on that, and I'm not sure if we really want to support the service mesh that extension, or if we would then check also other solutions if we want to offer service mesh, right? And
but considering the Envoy already supported, the gateway API supported, because it's more or less there. The infrastructure, the components are there because of the ingress path. So I don't see a reason why not. The gateway API is governing this process, this feature. The controllers that implement the gateway API that claim they are compatible, they should eventually support it if they haven't already. So I think adding support for the service mesh in this extension is valuable and could, of course, not be in the first version, but some point in the
in the
time.
future iteration, I agree, but I mean there are also Istio ambient mesh. We also have the Istio component, and
but we don't have to support everything. Now that we have we already have with this extension, we will have the Envoy implementation, and if it is matter just of some configurations to enable the service mesh, I don't see a reason why to implement another extension with another provider and so on. Whoever runs the shoot clusters, they always have the freedom to install themselves their own solution of their liking. So from Gartner point of view, it's valuable to provide at least one solution. And if it doesn't fit all the use cases, it's always possible to disable this extension and the users can install their own.
if you would like, I could add that to future enhancements so that it's open, but not for the first iteration. And at some point in time, we can add that.
If we define some stages of implementation of the extension, definitely service mesh could be not in the first stage, come later.
But it's a possible future enhancement. Okay, then I will add that part.
So about the provider config, I was a bit surprised to see configuration for the replicas and the resources there. Because typically, if we can avoid, we don't expose this directly, right? We just rely on typical autoscaling and only expose it in very exceptional cases where autoscaling is not good enough for some use cases. So is this really needed there? Or could we just rely on VPA, HPA for the replicas and the resource requirements?
We can rely on the VPA and all that stuff. So it's not explicitly needed. So
okay, then I would prefer to remove it at least from the beginning. If we later have use cases, we can discuss again. But then we do it like for the vast majority of the other components. Okay, and another question, the control plane is meant. So there's the mentioning of the Envoy control plane and the Envoy data plane. I'm not too familiar with these components, but would it be possible to run the control plane in the seed? Or
it would be hard because it's using XDS and it's doing some callbacks. It needs to acknowledge some things, and then we would need a tunnel or different paths, so where the client could call into the seed. And so far, we did not explicitly have a solution for that.
Okay,
That
yeah, because
also
it was
means that if there is some connectivity issue with the seed, the data plane routing like load balancers or gateways, whatever that means, might be affected as well. So you increase the blast radius that is usually clearly separated between seed and shoot. So I think it's desirable to keep the Envoy control plane running inside the chute. Also for network cost reasons, by the way, if the operator pays for traffic to the seed, that would definitely increase the cost there.
So it's not a typical control plane that we are used to, but really something that is needed for the network paths and so on. Okay. Maybe we can add this to the doc with one sentence, because there was just something that mentioned that it is explicitly avoided to run the control plane in the seed, but there was no explanation. I think it's not too obvious, at least.
I think I answered Vladimir in the comment.
Yeah, I didn't read all the
but I
100
can
comments in
also
the
add
PR.
Yeah, usually what would also be better to use a separate namespace, right? But the Garden Resource Manager, I think, does not support right now different namespaces.
It does. Since
it does in the meantime.
short time. Does support
Yeah, but when I checked, I first deployed in a different so it's implementation alternatives.
I also asked about this for the namespaces, because it's not clear to me exactly where each component will be deployed. I just guessed it could be kube system namespace, but if they're using dedicated namespaces and so on, maybe this will be clashing with users' own namespaces, because in Gardener we do not reserve any namespace in the shoot cluster for Gardener extensions purposes. So if you now try to deploy, let's say, Envoy namespace, there is some possibility the users
we
to
should
already
prefix it with Gardener or something to reduce the likelihood of obvious collisions. But even this can still happen.
Or we keep it in the kube system namespace, like what
I would vote to keep in the kube system for cluster operators, not operators, Kubernetes service providers, and so on. The kube system namespace is usually reserved for whatever they need to install in the cluster. But yeah, if I don't know if the Envoy would benefit from separating the components in namespaces, then maybe we can think about it. But if not, probably keeping the kube system is the better way. Also, end users could expect that everything that is deployed from Gardener extension will be in some of the system namespaces. And if they run some policies, something to scan their clusters, the workload, and so on, usually they could exclude the kube system namespace. But if the extension now use its own namespace, this could result in some findings that the users will have to resolve, or they will have to find a way to exclude these namespaces. So yeah, I'm kind of in favor of using the kube system if possible. And while we are talking about this, actually a good enhancement to the enhancement proposal could be some diagram to show all of the components that the extension will deploy. I have seen it in a couple of places. It lists services, deployments, HPA, VPA, and so on. But maybe the workload, like deployments, stateful sets, daemon sets, some maybe the CRDs as well. VPA and HPA can be skipped, and so on. Some config maps secrets could be skipped, but basically to have a clear picture what is deployed to where in the garden cluster, in the seed, in the shoot, and so on. So one architectural diagram, not necessarily very detailed, will benefit the extension proposal.
Okay, I can add that.
And in that sense, I have some, I have gone twice, I think, to the proposal. It's quite long, and I have seen you have removed some of the duplications, but it's still a bit hard for me to read everything, especially the comparison and so on between the different implementations. Maybe this can be skipped. Yeah, it's already decided to be Envoy. It could be just some arguments why it was decided. The other options, they will not be implemented in this extension if it is decided in the future to have support for Istio or Conk or some other implementation. I think it will be its own extension, and it will have to open own extension enhancement proposal. And the other thing is really this comparison and links to the traffic extension. I understand they both solve similar problem for ingress exposing of services, but it could be enough just to mention that there are alternative solutions, but after that they should be completely independent. If one wants to have ingress, could have ingress. If one wants to have gateway API, it could have the gateway API, and if somebody wants to have both, there is no issue to have them both. So they are not in conflict between each other. For implementation, it's a bit, they have some touch points because traffic also implements gateway API, but that's fine. It's the motivation why Envoy is chosen. It could be mentioned that traffic is also a solution, but it was decided not to go this way. That's it. So a bit of simplification of the proposal to make it shorter and easier to read and comprehend will be welcomed, at least from my point of view.
Does the rest seems the same, that we should remove the comparison part more or less?
Yeah, there is a link to the comparison from the other repository. So if someone wants to read it, it's fine to go and read the comparison there. There is no need to.
If it gets removed at some point in time, the comparison, so
Yeah,
I don't know if you want it in or not. So
yeah, there is this risk. Maybe with a appendix file, it could be added, but in the main enhancement proposal, I would skip the comparison. Or just be very brief, 1 or 2 sentences that there are alternative solutions that were that you have take a look at, but we have decided to go with Envoy. So no need of a detailed explanation what is the advantages and disadvantages of the other options. In the end, I even would rename the enhancement proposal because it is not for Gateway API as a generic API, but it is for Envoy as an implementation of a Gateway API. So
Are you proposing to remove the comparison from the GEP?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's surprising because I find it quite valuable to understand why Envoy is proposed and not something else. I mean, otherwise, this would definitely be a question. I think we also had it in the traffic extension. There was also some analysis being done upfront, which ingress controller would be a good fit for
But-
replacement for Nginx, and we had a comparison there and came out with graphic. So it's
But
quite happy.
there, the goal was also to have some compatibility with the Nginx Ingress add-on, so that the
Yeah.
applications and everything that was as a prerequisite and so on. So at
This
least I
was
would
in the
not keep
end.
it in the main enhancement proposal, maybe in some side file, some appendix. So
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think it's valuable to have it somewhere in this PR to understand how this came, that Envoy is the thing that is proposed here.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot of content that I just go very quickly through it and even do not read in details.
Sure. Okay.
Some of the metrics there, I even might not understand very correctly, and it depends how the measurement was done. So there is some throughputs and so on, but to be honest, I cannot fully trust on these metrics because I don't know what is the setup. It could be, yeah. There was also one comment that the author of the comparison is a major contributor to one of the solutions, so the opinion could be a bit biased, of course. But
Sure.
Envoy seems to be decent enough solution.
So as a middle ground, we could keep the section evaluation of gateway API implementations. I think that's exactly what Raphael was referring to when saying it's valuable to have the evaluation and how the decision came to be. And yeah, probably we can drop the mentions of the other implementations from the alternatives section because it's quite duplicated to the section before. So user or readers who are interested in knowing why exactly we decided for Envoy Gateway can read the section. The others can just skip it. Similar as I trust your judgment. I basically just skipped over the section. Yeah, because I also don't know the metrics and so on. But it's good to have that in there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or a separate file would also be fine.
sounds good.
Okay, talking about different gateway API implementations, I was wondering about one detail. You said that users of the extensions could still install a different implementation of the gateway API and use both in parallel in the shoot. How would users resolve the conflict between CRDs? Do they need to disable management of the CRDs in the extension and then just ensure that versions are compatible, or how is this envisioned?
It's a Kubernetes gateway API, CRDs, right? That's the one which should be stable. So in Envoy, or which should be at a fixed version, and then you have some dependencies on Envoy, which CRDs are compatible with that, and also on the other gateway API implementation, which are compatible to that. And then it's hard because then you also have the Kubernetes version dependency, right, to the gateway API implementation. So when you have multiple gateway API implementation or gateway classes at that point in time, you have to ensure on your own that you are compatible to that. So I mean, it's a hard dependency, and if one installation of the gateway API CRDs, you have to make sure that the rest is compatible.
Okay, so probably that means users will need to manage the CRDs on their own, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Okay.
there is no silver bullet, right? I mean, either they can stay with the managed approach and then they have to ensure that the other implementations fulfill that, or basically they do it on their own and basically then they also have to somehow manage that it stays compatible. I think
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's difficult, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, probably there's no better solution. You're right. Um, One detail about that. So if users started with the extension and later on want to add another gateway API implementation in parallel, they would or might want to disable this field manage CRDs. I assume that we should not delete the CRDs from the cluster in that case, right? We should probably rather document that disabling this field after the fact will not delete CRDs and users need to do it on their own if they actually want to do it, right? Otherwise, they will probably delete all the gateway classes and routes and whatnot. Might be catastrophic.
Okay,
Does that
yeah.
make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. One other thing about the CRDs, I already mentioned it in the pull request and received some feedback. So, from my team's perspective, we would be interested in having an extension that only manages the CRDs without any implementation, because we will have several CRDs for several extensions working with the Gateway API, for example, an extension with external DNS and so on. Application load balancer for our infrastructure. Um, but it seems like there might be other options that would be better fit than to use this specific extension to manage the CRDs. Should we go into more details now, or should we just skip this discussion?
I think we can also go into that discussion. I think from my point of view, it would be difficult to it would add a completely different scenario to the extension if the extension should, on the one hand side, provide basically an implementation, and because the implementation is only useful if you also ship the API, so bundle that together, and then as a separate scenario, just ship the CRDs, because I mean, you can always ship the CRDs that match the implementation version, but if you want your own implementation, you might want a different CRD version, and then it gets somewhat complicated, because why would this extension ship a Gateway API version that is not yet supported by Envoy Gateway, right?
Yep.
So therefore, I think then if we want to go in that direction, we should really have a separate extension, and then we could also consider by kind of removing it here. I don't know. I think it's also not a complex task to just ship the CRDs as part of
Right.
an extension. So that's why I wrote also. I mean, I think it makes more sense to have that separate if you want a CRD only extension.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah, makes sense for me.
the shoot static manifests feature would install the CRDs only to the shoots. No, I mean, you might not need the full extension.
Yeah. Then you would need to use some label selectors for specifying the channel if you want to support both, right? But yeah, that would still be possible.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe the major difference is that the shoot static manifests, this is controlled by the gardener operator, while the extension is controlled by the shoot owner.
Hmm.
So it has some advantages and disadvantages.
Okay. Then we keep the non-goal as stated that this extension does not only ship the API, but always bundles it with the implementation, right? Sounds good to me. Okay, I think one last question I had in the PR comments was about the restriction to shoots that have purpose evaluation. So at the end of the document, it said that this should only be there in the beginning and it will be removed later on. I was wondering about it being configurable in the extension. I mean, if that's the way you want to restrict usage, to get early feedback, that's fine, I guess. But operators could be at a different stage of, yeah, evaluation of this extension, I would say. So maybe they want to keep the restriction a bit longer or similar things. So it might make sense to allow operators to move at a different pace than the extension implementation. So it might be valuable to have it configurable, whether this restriction applies or not.
Yes, we can make that configurable.
I could also imagine a scenario where you have different landscapes, and in like a canary or staging landscape or whatever, you allow all users and all shoots to use this extension because different SLAs apply or something like this. And in the production landscape, you only want to allow shoots with purpose evaluation or something. And you don't want to couple that to the extensions version because you want to ship new features independent of whether it's available for all shoots or not. So in that sense, it might also make help to have it configurable.
I mean, implementation-wise, this would be in the admission webhook, right? When you create a shoot. So if you would not like it, you could just leave out the admission webhook. But if we should make it configurable, the admission webhook, then I can add that if that is what you're asking for.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I think disabling the webhook also disables validation of the provider config API, right? So it has other consequences.
Yeah, I think making it configurable is no big deal. I think the whole idea behind that, or making it first only for evaluation cluster was that what we learned from our potential stakeholders that they want control over the Ingress controller, especially the Ingress controller lifecycle management in terms of when an update would occur. And that's basically something that, as you see in this gap and also in the traffic gap, that's not in place yet. That's something we want to propose later on, coming soon. So spoiler. So some version management similar to Cloud Profile, basically, so that you can state, I want this version, and I have some maintenance, some expiration dates and so on when I will force migrate it, but within the period I can migrate on my own. And that's what we think is necessary or would be very helpful for a real production grade extension in that sense. But of course, if someone wants to use it also earlier for particular landscapes, as you said, if you have anyway a test landscape or a canary landscape where the SLAs are different, then I think we can make that configurable. That's not a problem.
Cool. That was my last point for discussion.
I had one question about the future enhancements that I didn't really understand. So there was the mentioning of the gateway class parameters, and where you want to expose a curated set of Envoy proxy template fields so that shoot owners can tune common knobs without handwriting Envoy proxy objects. What does this mean?
Just
What's also
I have
link in the chat.
to look that up. I barely remember.
My understanding is that this is similar to how annotations were exposed for the ingress load balancer. so that you can configure additional settings for the load balancer service that will be exposing the gateway. So this is how to add some additional configurations via the shoot spec that are
exactly. I assume that are part of the Helm configuration. So some things, I mean, a lot of things are already configurable via Gateway API, and I think those, yeah, users can use those anyway. The question is if they want to specify something that usually they would specify in the Helm charts. They, as we discussed, we deploy everything into the shoot cluster. They could use something like mutating admission policies, but maybe some of the features make sense on their own so that they don't have a mutating admission for the Envoy artifacts, but simply say, I want proxy protocol enabled, or I don't know what, some features that you don't specify in the actual gateway API resources, but would specify somewhere else.
Okay, yeah, this I understand, but if you open the section again that I sent to the chat, the last few words, so they say without handwriting envoy objects or per gateway annotations. What should this mean? So I understand that we might want to make some things configurable that are related to the infrastructure, like the load balancer or whatnot. Okay. But what has this to do with the envoy objects or gateway annotations? Yeah, you mean common configuration or what? That you can, for example, configure via a command line flag that then applies to all envoy objects, for example.
Let me rephrase that. I will adapt that or remove it if it's something.
The load balancers are provider specific sometimes. Will be there some kind of validation on these templates or the configured values and so on, so that if the shoot is for GCP and one tries to configure some AWS features, this should be denied. Or maybe the provider extensions will have to validate this, I don't know. So in the Envoy extension, you might want to configure something AWS specific, then which component should validate that this is valid configuration.
Do you have an example, but do you want to configure an envoy in the envoy config? What is provider specific?
Yeah, in the proposal exactly, you have some examples for access walks, for example. And if you configure it differently on different cloud providers, so there should be something that you have to validate. If I try to enable access walks for GCP load balancer, but actually the shoot is on AWS, so this would be invalid configuration, or it will have no effect.
I think that it's more envoy access logs.
Maybe this will be a bit complicated question because it will be some kind of restricting the supported infrastructures. The Envoy extension will also have to be extended. So if I want to add support for another infrastructure that has its own set of annotations and so on, eventually the Envoy extension will have to be extended to support them or to allow them. So I understand the need for these configurations to be available so that shoot owners can set them. Just wondering how to put them in a validation so that they do not misconfigure something.
I don't think we have similar validation for example, the seed spec and the load balancer annotations there. and maybe we can live without it for now. Doesn't seem to be.
Seed is kind of restricted. It's operated by cardinal operators that are kind of expected. They know what they are doing, but
Yeah, but the shoot owner should also know that his shoot is on GCP.
But
should.
the user base is larger, and it would be beneficial if some validation is done, so that it doesn't require some support.
How would you validate, for example, that I don't specify AWS annotations on a GCP shoot there? I mean, this is very complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, they're also not technically wrong. You can specify any annotation. They just most likely don't have any effect.
Yeah, if it's just it's questionable. It depends what you can configure there and what could be the effect. So, and where it is used. So it will, as far as I understand, this option will be quite open, so you can set a lot of things. It's not necessarily a annotation on a load balancer service. It could end up somewhere else where it could end up being some malicious configuration. So that should be prevented. So the options that are exposed there should be for sure validated.
Agreed. At least for me, the bottom line of that section, I agree with Raphael. Maybe we should take a look at that section again and try to, maybe rewrite it or make it more clear what we want to do and what we don't want to do.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left. Are there any fundamental discussion points left?
I have one, just last one, that I also shared in the reviews. So with the extensions, we have the practice to implement them only for shoots. And since recently we have the concept for Cardon and Seed class extensions, so it was not the best transition when we had to extend already existing extensions to support Cardon or Seed. So considering that this is a new extension that could eventually extend also Cardon and Seeds, I don't see a blocker there. From design point of view, I would try to do it class agnostic, so that not in the first implementation phase, but sometime later, it can easily be extended to support also the Cardon and the Seed class extensions. So anything that has shoot in its name and so on, I would remove it and keep it generic, so that it is just Envoy extension or something like that.
I also commented this just before the minute. I never understood why we have even started to put shoot into the name of the extensions. I think somebody started for whatever reasons and then people copied it, but it doesn't make too much sense. So let's just not have it.
A big +1 from my side on that.
Okay, yeah. I think there are still a lot of open comments, at least in the PR. So yeah, but fundamentally everybody seems to be content, I guess, with the proposal. So probably the way forward would be to resolve these comments, adapt the document accordingly, have another round that everybody is happy with the document then, and then we can get it merged.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Any final thoughts, questions, feedback before we close?
Nope, I'm happy for today.
Okay, Sebastian, anything from you?
No, but only after the meeting. So if there are some meeting minutes or I don't know how this works now with Zoom.
Yeah, we will publish them on the website. There's, let me share it also here in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a page for this steering session. which you could maybe also add to your metadata in the PR.
Mm-hmm.
And there the recording and the decisions will be published.
Apart from that, I'm happy that we agreed to use Envoy now as a gateway API implementation. So basically, I think in the beginning that was what this TSC was about, which solution we want to offer. And now I think this is more on details side.
Yeah, refining the document and making some things more clear, and then we can go ahead here. Okay, cool. Then thanks for the proposal. Thanks for the discussion, and have a nice day. See you next time.
See you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.